Okay. My name's Ryan. My presentation is on the death of Microsoft. It's not Linux, it's certainly not Apple. The solution for killing Microsoft isn't another OS, it's taking that platform dominance away from them. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. Does anybody work for Microsoft here? Anybody? Don't be embarrassed. Okay, we're just going to bash the shit out of them. Okay. I'm just some guy talking. I don't have any special qualifications that say, okay, this is why I think Microsoft is going to die and why I'm qualified to say that, but I have the microphone and you don't, so you're going to listen to me. Butt nozzle. Ha ha ha. Laugh, laugh, laugh. Okay. So, why are we talking about this? This affects all of computing. This is the most important thing that any of us, because Microsoft is the richest, most powerful company in the history of the world. When they collapse, it's going to be something that's studied in business classes and dissected to death. It'll be a turning point in computing and really modern civilization. It's like Rome falling. So let's go through some past threats to Microsoft. Say 1980s, what threatened Microsoft? Anybody? Bueller? Apple. That was their first big threat. They, had to fight against Apple, and really it was, their biggest battle. They didn't have that market dominance to just brush everyone aside. It was a fight to the death. Apple, put up a great fight. Does anyone have a good reason of why Microsoft won that? What's that? IBM. Yeah, having IBM in the corner certainly helped.
Open systems and everything.
Yeah, open systems tend to beat out the proprietary. Another big thing, and kind of related to IBM, is that in 1984, nobody bought a home computer that didn't use the exact same thing at work. And Microsoft and IBM were terrific about developing business software. And near as I can tell, that's the biggest reason that the Microsoft won. And they really weren't threatened until late 90s. There was WordPerfect, some other applications, but really Microsoft just grabbed computing by the cojones and had their way with us. Now, 1997, or late 90s, there was a big revolution, maybe you've heard of it, called the Internet. Now, the biggest threat to Microsoft in that was Netscape, or so they thought. Netscape, through NCSA and Mosaic and finally Netscape, built a great browser which was the great content delivery mechanism for the Internet, and of course the Internet's wonderful. And Microsoft fought dirty and succeeded with Internet Explorer, but it really ended up that the browser just isn't that important. It's the delivery mechanism, but the content is the thing for you. Earlier against Apple, it was platform versus platform, but with Microsoft versus Netscape, it was a platform versus an application. At the introduction of the Internet, 1997, early 90s, even, or late 90s, early 2000, if you ask someone to choose between having their web browser or the rest of their desktop applications, you would choose the desktop applications. And that's something that really isn't as prevalent today. It's kind of flip-flopped. What's important? Well, if I had to choose, I'd choose my web browser. Everything that I can do on the desktop, I can do through the web browser if I absolutely have to. And it's worth mentioning Linux. 2001-ish, Department of Justice has given up on Microsoft and the Internet Explorer debacle. But why hasn't Linux succeeded? Anyone? I'm not going to throw stuff at you.
Ponytails and sandals?
Well, yeah. To random J computing person, look at who's developing an operating system, and there's the extension of Big Blue. There's Microsoft versus some guy in sandals. There's I can understand that. One of the things I wrote down was Linux is too tough for idiots. It's one thing for us to use Linux, but whenever I hear somebody talk about, hey, I switched this person over to Linux, it's that they switched them over for this one specific task, and if they try to vary outside of that specific task, they can't do it. Maybe Linux peaked a bit too early. Newer, very friendly distros are a lot more easy for total idiots to use. Back in 2001, when Linux became popular with the mainstream media, if you wanted to set this up on your computer, you probably needed to know what video card you had and what sound card you had, and everybody in this room can certainly do that, but our grandmas can't. So that's something I wrote down for why Linux never succeeded in really displacing Microsoft. I mean, the battle isn't all the way over, but I just can't imagine Linux pulling it out without assassinating Bill Gates and doing some other stuff. So what can displace it? This is the only time I'm going to use this term, so listen carefully. Web 2.0. Okay, I won't ever say that again because it's such a horrible term. Nobody really has a good definition for it. It seems like a marketing thing, so I'm not going to talk about it anymore. But that's web technology stuff. Has a fighting chance at displacing Microsoft. So if nobody has a good definition for it, what is it? It's certainly not a technology like JavaScript. It's not even a collection of technologies like Ajax or LAMP is. It's really a collection of collections of technology. It's the things like social components, remixable data sources, software as a service, user-controlled data, and really the concept that any NetSpeed internet application has the more people use it. BitTorrent, MySpace, all those things, eBay, have more value the more people use it. Traditional applications don't scale that way. Has anybody noticed the similarity between blogs and GeoCities? Just everybody has a blog, and GeoCities from like 1990, 95, it was just a random collection of everybody that wanted to put out their content, sort of like podcasting. The real difference, that the added technology, is that blogs put it into chronological order, just like podcasting, where if you wanted to see the newest thing, with a blog, you go to it, the newest is at the top, you can see it, and that's the only difference between that and GeoCities. So it's interesting to think about one little change like that, how it can revolutionize a whole technology. So some of the 2.0 apps that they're coming out, Ajax Write is just terrific. You can use it as a word processor, but it's still at that point where it's if you have to. You don't want to use it every single day because it just drives you crazy. But it's so much closer than we were, pre-Ajax, say Gmail, pre-network storage, where a whole big giant application like Ajax Write 10 years ago, you wrote it in Java and it took 5 minutes to download. And then you saved it to like your local sandbox, and hopefully you could save it there because you tried to restrict the Java. It's gained a lot closer. The big things that Web 2.0 is missing right now is a not solid API to override everything, where, say, from your Ajax Write, you can say, okay, I've made this document, now let's send it to my blog. Let's send it to my Gmail account and this contact on it through the single interface. And that's something that some of the newer platform-oriented browsers are trying to do, the UOS.com, trying to merge all of that. But where they're not succeeding is that they're trying to do the traditional mashup of using their existing services, using the APIs for Gmail, and trying to merge them all together, where really there needs to be someone to step forward and say, okay, everybody that wants to talk together needs to do it this way. REST is a good protocol for doing that. If you're not familiar with it, REST sits on top of HTTP. Everything has an object, and everything uses the same methods like get, delete, put, and with that, as long as, say, services are advertising a consistent level of objects, Gmail has a /contact/email address, and say to get the list of contacts, get /contact. To add contacts, same thing. I think once more web services start to use a very consistent method for doing that, then we'll be able to really do the platform in a browser. Go ahead.
So the question about Microsoft assuming dominance or being killed by all this. So their model has been win the war by brute force. You throw enough money at the problem and the problem goes away. So what's preventing them from co-opting these collection of collections, as you call it, and basically doing it and longer and harder and better than anybody else can until they've won this one again and push it to the side?
Yep, I'm getting there. I think that they will. That's certainly what they've done in the past. And it's worked before, so I think that's what Microsoft will try to do to combat it. Microsoft does have that dominance, at least at the client end, and they do have a significant market share at the server end as well. Now, if you control one end of that, you can proprietary extension and hope that people use it. But when you control both ends of that communication, then you can do that proprietary on both ends and lock other people out of it. And that's what Microsoft will do. They don't have a lot of server market share, at least in comparison to the desktop. But fundamentally, that's kind of flawed. The biggest benefit of 2.0 is that services can interact with other services. That proprietary, let's lock everybody out, doesn't play well into that. So I think that we'll end up with sort of a fragmented web, i.e. Like the IE versus Netscape days, where as a web developer or a web application developer now, you wrote content. Sometimes it worked with IE, sometimes it worked with Netscape, sometimes it was horribly broken in the browser that you weren't writing for. And as this progresses, I think that we'll have web applications like that, that are, you must run this on the Windows server and you must have an IE client. And on the other end, open developers that will try and write it for both and of course Microsoft writing, locking out their proprietary extensions so that of course developers can't target IA clients. So I think that will happen, but that doesn't play into the big strength of the Web 2.0. As this comes about, I think that the open standards will take an early lead because, well, Microsoft isn't the innovator. Historically, Microsoft has been able to play catch up by just brute force, by pumping dollars into it. So they don't need to innovate and haven't been. So open source will take an early lead in the Web 2.0 battle. Now, as new web services come to light, they'll have to choose between, okay, we can go the Microsoft route, which has always worked for us before, or we can use the open source route. It has all these new features, and we can talk to this great killer app. We can talk to all this other stuff. And on the Microsoft side, if anybody has developed using Microsoft technologies, VB Script, Visual C++, it's not that you can't write for a more open architecture, but you're just so restricted in ways that you can do it. And Microsoft developers just don't have that initiative to learn how to develop the right way. So there'll be that decision that new players coming to market will have to make, whether they go the Microsoft way or the open source way. And open source will win that battle because, not just because open source is the nice people in the sandals, but open source has that, hey, we can work with this and this and this and this. So, open source will win that initial push because they're the innovator. And then as new stuff comes to market, they'll get a significant portion of that as well. Now, we'll see a lot of traditional desktop apps, even ones that you wouldn't think of, moving to Web 2.0, just because of all the benefits, all the things like, hey, I can take this Photoshop and put it online, sell licenses for a day, which is something that they can't do right now. You sell a Photoshop license for a day for $2. Put out a press release, hey, we've got this new filter, it gets picked up by you click on that, go to Photoshop, buy a license for a day, go into Photoshop.com, make a pretty picture, and then save it to your blog. Adobe would love something like that because it will expose new people to the product. It's easier for them to manage licenses. Software as a service has just tremendous benefits from a licensing perspective. They get that continued revenue. It's easier for them to enforce licenses. They don't have to say, hey, let's sell this one copy of Photoshop to a company. Let's license every developer that they have. So there's a big incentive for traditional software developers that you wouldn't think would be Web 2.0 applications to push their product to that. Now, of course, as they do, they get to say, okay, let's interact with this service. Let's be able to print it out at Walmart.com, and all the benefits of everybody else. It's the same thing where, on eBay, the value is from the number of people that are in it. Well, it's going to be the same thing with Web 2.0 in general, where the more companies that are producing Web 2.0 applications, the better the interoperability will be. So this is going to be another case, or another case of Microsoft having to fight a platform versus platform. This isn't platform versus app, this is platform versus a new way of thinking. And Microsoft will try and do their extended embrace, extinguish, where they make the proprietary extensions, but that is exactly the opposite of the strength of Web 2.0. You know, it's, hey, let's interrupt with everything. And as Microsoft tries to fight that, that's exactly their weakness in the new platform. One of the neat things that's going to happen as software transitions from the desktop to the web is that software versions will end. Like I said before with software licensing, you know, if you have Photoshop.com, there isn't a way to say you can access Photoshop7.com, but as soon as you go to Photoshop8.com, you need to pay us another license. That doesn't play well into the Web 2.0 concept, where updates can just be pushed out as needed. And you know, it's another effort for software companies. They don't have to deliver patches. They don't have to regression test and support 5-year-old products. They can say, let's support Photoshop.com and hope to hell everything is running okay, and if it's not, then we run the patch to fix it, and all of our customers are running the exact same code. Which is just a tremendous cost-saving measure for them. And as applications from the traditional client PC to the network, the client obsolescence slows. It doesn't matter if you're running Photoshop.com on Pentium 4 2.6 gigahertz or Pentium 4 3 gigahertz. All that matters is the bandwidth, and really the obsolescence is at the server end, making sure that the bandwidth is there, making sure storage is Moore's law covers processing power, and that will really take care of that on the server end. But I think where we're going to see the bottlenecks is bandwidth and storage coming up. Just like Jason Scott said in the last talk, MP3 is an old technology, and the processing power to do it, just wasn't there when it was developed. We're going to start seeing very similar things like that on the server end, where somebody could make a Windows replacement today, browser it or platform in a browser, but without the bandwidth to deliver streaming video in that from your local DVD drive, there's still very real limitations to it. So that server obsolescence is going to be one of the big battles to fight. Read over here. You did everything way out of order. So let me see here. Does anybody have any questions so far? Yeah.
Well, why do you think, web thin clients will be any more successful than
traditional thin clients? Well, traditional thin clients have a lot of limitations that the web thin clients won't. Now, I'm not saying that we'll have traditional thin clients working with Web 2.0 apps. I think that as development happens, if a balance can be stricken where Photoshop.com can do some rendering on your local system as well as utilizing the server resources when it's appropriate. Yeah, I think that that'll be the best solution, where we can find a balance in that. With that, you know, it doesn't exclude a traditional thin client from accessing it. You know, if a traditional thin client just doesn't have any resources to do it locally, you know, it can happen at the server. And that's just something that isn't covered by any Web 2.0 technologies today. It might be a Web 3.0. So I think that'll be a very interesting thing that happens, where the client doesn't matter as much, but each will have its limitations. You know, if I'm doing Photoshop.com on my PDA, you know, I'm going to have bandwidth limitations for however I'm accessing it, plus display, plus input, plus processing. So it could be where if you access it on PDA, you have limited capabilities. You know, thin client would be another step, Pentium 6 would be another step, and maybe the platform can kind of detect how you're accessing it and what your client capabilities are, and utilize it effectively. Yeah, another thing that is going to have to kind of come up is network storage. I really like Gmail, just for the concept that it's 2 gigabytes of storage that I don't have to manage on my desktop computer. You know, it's frowned upon right now to, you know, use one of the utilities to use connected mounted as a file system, but I think that pretty quickly we'll see some high-profile names actually offering that, where it is a network share. Probably ad supported, probably with a paid option. But, and if they do a good job of it, probably using REST or some other nice API for letting other services interact with it, you can, you know, host your eBay images there, or host, you know, podcast links. They're fed off your blogger.com account. So I think storage from the network side is something that we're going to see some advances in pretty quickly. Any other questions? All right. Well, that's all I have then. Don't hold me as at 9. All right, thank you.
You received for Microsoft. I've heard things like their existing code is part of the problem. They having trouble delivering on new features that people are willing to shell money for.
Well, any big code base is just a problem, especially on the proprietary software side, where you have to pay people to manage it. You know, it's tough to have those millions of lines of code and try and do something innovative with it while still maintaining that backwards compatibility. So I think it's a big problem for them, but I don't think it's a threat in the manner that no matter what, they still have that installed base of Windows 98 people that aren't going to change. I don't think that their problems in managing that alone will contribute to their downfall.
But I have heard the argument that the amount of code they have to maintain to be compatible with those older apps is adding a lot of overhead to that process.
Mm-hmm.
Into even Windows Vista.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that Microsoft stated, and Gates has stated, is that they consider breaking backwards compatibility to be a lost asset.
Yes. And you know, that's a big benefit of Web 2.0. You don't have that backwards compatibility. Everybody's on one version. So as they develop Vista and try and maintain 16-bit DOS support, so you can still run Doom before the Windows port, it's a battle. It's particularly a big battle for them because they have to pay the developers to do it and fight through it, and it's a big problem. I'm glad I don't have to solve it.
Is that an advantage to the open source world? Is the fact that you can always recompile with newer libraries? Because generally, source is doesn't break as often as binary compatibilities when you're dealing with closed source apps.
Yeah, but from Microsoft's vantage point, they have the source code for the most important part of that relationship. From an open source point, when you're faced with that problem, you always have the option of saying, I don't want to do that backwards compatibility and dropping it. If enough people want it, they can pick it up as a fork or complain and persuade you otherwise. But I think you have a lot more freedom in an open source project faced with that situation than a proprietary billion-dollar company where you have such a installed base that when you drop support for something, you hear about it from a lot larger client base.
Well, my opinion on it is basically with a closed source, really their employees can work on it. Whereas with open source, it's open to the community. So if somebody doesn't like something, you just pull it out. Otherwise, you have to wait on Microsoft. And of course, they're going to take forever, ever. Whereas you just say, hey, can you write this portion? Yeah, great. Can you write this portion?
Mm-hmm.
That's the advantage of it.
But one of the trade-offs is that too is it turns until we get this into a meritocracy where I think it covers on Lug Radio a few episodes back where if it's something that's interesting, then it gets a lot of people working on it. But if it's less interesting but it's still critical, then you get one or two people on, you hope they stay on it so it keeps being worked on.
The code is always going to evolve, it's always going to change. I mean, you're never going to have the same person working on the same piece of code at one point in time. I mean, you're going to have a lot of people that are going to stick around, but that's the whole point. A different person can code a different viewpoint.
If you look at SourceForge, there are thousands of apps that were started, but they didn't actually get anywhere because they didn't achieve critical mass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of software development projects, open source in particular, but all of them, are started to scratch an individual niche. Oftentimes an individual will get bored or find a different solution or decide, hey, I really don't want to rewrite all this tons of code just for my little itch. So, if searching SourceForge, you can find tons of projects that are in that boat. But also, there's the projects where individual that they want to fill. They write the code, it sits for a year, and then it becomes a big thing. Samba is a great example of that. If you read the history of that, Jeremy Allison did it in like 1992, and it just sat dormant for years. He had a need for it in his company, and then several years later, lots of people said, hey, Linux is cool now, I want to hook up my Windows share to it. And the project took off from there. So there's a big balance between how many people the software project will fill and the time that it'll take to do it.
Do you think that, like, between Samba and Wine and OpenDoc, they're going to have a reasonable undermining Microsoft's domination in certain areas?
I don't. I don't think that's the right way to do it. Samba and Wine are tremendous projects, and they do great things, but they try and do the things that Microsoft is doing better than Microsoft is doing them. And that's just an impossible battle to win. A few years ago, Samba's performance just blew water. And Windows Server 2003 came around, and normal file sharing performance isn't that different between the two. Windows Server 2003 is actually stable now, and when they did their new Active Directory stuff, it broke everything in Samba for managing domains. So Microsoft, it can always be one step ahead of those types of projects. Anything innovative that Samba or an open source project does can easily find its way into the proprietary code, even if it's not a direct code copy. But the opposite isn't always true. There's things that Microsoft can do that are just tough to reverse engineer. It took Samba quite a long time to really get their Active Directory stuff together after Microsoft blindsided them and released that.
What about like the software patent and the current EU battles?
Oh, man. I want to rant about that, but I'll refrain myself. Yeah, software patents are wrong. Every country that's doing that just needs to be instructed the proper way of developing software, because obviously the people that are managing that don't know. The problem with software patents are that you patent the process of doing something, but in software there's tons of different ways of doing that. So you really have no benefits of the patent, but you restrict competition. And that's something that we're done here in the US and the EU. And it's a terrible blow to open source. And unfortunately, commercial software is the one that has lots of money to throw at politicians and lobbyists and marketing. And I'm not sure how open source really combats that, other than disseminating that knowledge, which is something open source is good at.
Well, we got a few friendly vendors like IBM who has the most patents.
Mm-hmm.
And Red Hat and a few others have made the association where they share patents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, now that open source has caught on to that and realized the value of software patents, yeah, especially the corporate contributors like IBM and Red Hat, the open source has started to realize that value and amass what they can with that, which is a good thing. But it's still something that needs to be abolished.
Well, to kind of go back to what he was saying, and I apologize for coming in late if you already covered it.
No problem.
Really, in my opinion, the battle is going to be won against Microsoft as far as getting it on the business desktop.
Mm-hmm.
If we could get more adoption by businesses, because people, I got this Microsoft at work, I can have it. That's the way they think.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you get more people familiar with it, and the open source community can develop more business apps and have more of a business angle to it,
Mm-hmm.
I think you could really make a case for open source. But as long as it stays in an obscure edge of the community,
Yeah.
where Microsoft dominates the market, and I mean, if you just leave it in the community, if you leave it in the consumer category, it might not get anywhere. But if you put it on the business community, where you got one company with 20,000 desktops,
Mm-hmm.
and you got multiple companies like that, the more and more, the more you get it out there, the better off it will be.
Yeah, that's exactly how the battle between IBM, Microsoft, and Apple was. Microsoft reached the business community first, and they went on to win. But that was a bit different because, back then nobody bought a home computer using the same thing at work first. There was a horrible phobia about computers, and you had to be familiar.
Well,
And
unfortunately, it still carries over even today. That's what I'm saying.
Yep, there is, and I certainly won't disagree with you because you're making my point.
I came in late, sorry.
But it is less than it was in the mid '80s. I think it still has a lot to do with market share, where certainly in the mid '80s, once you reach businesses and you got businesses to take over, you won market share just because that was it. Now I think that's possible to win over that market share by reaching consumers first. I think that if you put out a good killer app and reach consumers first, that will spread over to
There's
businesses.
so much competition in the consumer market, that's why, I mean, you've got Linux, you've got Microsoft, you've got how many other different distros of Linux, I mean, you've got so much competition on the consumer market. That's why I'm saying I think it would be more of a,
Yeah.
the way that you would form a battle plan is to really form more business-friendly free apps. Because the business is going to look at it and say, hey, wait a minute, I can get this piece of software that I can use that I don't got to pay Microsoft or IBM buku bucks for, and I've already got a community of people that understand that. We just have to retrain them.
Mm-hmm.
Once that happens, you have widespread adoption, then people start, oh, hey, I've got Linux at work, I can run Linux at home, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, it's certainly a good point that because the business market is more limited and doesn't have as much options, and there's a clear delimitation between, okay, we can set up this option with Linux or with a web technology and it will cost this much money, versus if we do it with Microsoft or another technology, it will cost this much money. In business, there's a very clear line where once you cross that, it makes business sense to adopt open source or Linux or whatever it is that you're adopting. And consumers, there isn't that clear of a delineation. Consumers can be, you'll reach this set of consumers if you do this and include this feature, but you won't or you'll reach a different set if you don't include this feature, include something else instead. So, yeah, it's a good point that I'd say the business market is still easier to penetrate, but I don't think that the consumer market and that path into all of computing, I don't think that that's closed off.
Well, I talked to a lot of different CEOs. Most CEOs are very business-minded, they're clueless when it comes to their technology center. So I think if we can educate more CEOs and decision makers as to the advantages of it, that more people could, because they're the guys that are saying, they're the ones that are getting wine and dine like Microsoft and saying, it's $1 package.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Linux or open source or web apps just don't traditionally have the guy that the CEO out to dinner. Corporate sponsorship through, yeah.
There's got to be other ways that you can do it, that you can turn people on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the corporate sponsorship through IBM and Red Hat, it's just helped the community tremendously. But it is just a matter of getting the information out there. It's not that the CEO has to be taken to dinner to endorse a product, but the CEO has to be familiar with it. Case in point, I was aware of a company that was evaluating network vendors, and pretty early on, the technology guys had discounted Cisco for the networking hardware. Cisco had came in late on the quote, and they really didn't like working with the interface and just didn't want to deal with Cisco, so they asked them. And then corporate management came in and pretty much said the equivalent of, I don't know what companies you're considering, but we see Cisco commercials on TV. What's wrong with them? And
People believe what they see.
how open source fights that and gets the information to the masses is a tough challenge, and one that it's not all that well suited to fight. Yes.
Read that like Google, for instance, is planning on releasing like complete Office suite through I guess web service 2.0 or web 2.0, and they believe that will be one of the things that will secure their own protection from Microsoft and like competition for search dominance in the future. Do you foresee that could be something that could very much weaken Microsoft's hold on the corporate, for instance?
I love Google. In the last few months, I've heard rumors of Google releasing the Web Office suite, Google leasing semi-trailer looking containers of equipment to just store racks of storage and yeah, the global data centers where they just park them often at network access points, and so they can be closer to the end user. Google
PCs.
Yeah, Google PCs, Google Wireless, where they track users, send you ads based on location because they know where you are since you're using Google Wireless. So I love everything that Google does just because Microsoft has to be having fits about them.
You know Ballmer's screaming in a boardroom somewhere?
Yeah, Ballmer screaming in a boardroom. The question was about if Google releases an Office suite, how does that affect Microsoft? I think Microsoft should be extremely concerned about anything that Google does. Ballmer in a boardroom isn't that far off. I think that any large company, whether it's Google or IBM or Red Hat, if they released a web office suite, that would have an immediate impact on Microsoft's position going forward. I think that they would immediately start throwing those dollars towards having their own web office suite. I think that they are doing that already. If you go to the windowslive.com, initially it was a stub that kind of mentioned the web office suite. And in fact, I think that appeared very shortly after the rumors of Google's web office suite. I don't think that Google is actually doing one. Yes, they did buy Rightly, which is an Ajax Write, very similar to that.
I'm surprised that Google has gotten away with the same type of business strategy as Microsoft. I'm surprised Microsoft didn't buy Google early on, or I wonder if they're kicking themselves in the ass now that they didn't try to make a move on Google and kill them early.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, things would be a lot better off for Microsoft, but can't really buy every Web 2.0 startup. Wait, yeah, I guess they can, but
if it maintains their place in market dominance, I'm sure they try to.
Mm-hmm. I don't know why they don't just buy every technology company. Department of Justice would weigh into that a little bit, but they beat them once, they can beat them again. Yeah.
Because I mean, that's been their, to me, in my opinion, that's been their whole strategy, trying to stifle innovation. Is they get pissed, somebody comes up with a competing technology.
Mm-hmm.
We will assimilate you.
Mm-hmm.
They just suck them up and then they kill the idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, shit.
Yeah.
That's a good idea out there.
Yeah, and that's certainly one of the best things about open source is that they haven't found a way to really combat that. They can't buy every open source company. They can't convince developers to sign over copyrights, and Microsoft hasn't found a good way to combat it. But at the same time, open source hasn't done enough innovation to really persuade consumers or business or anyone to switch over en masse.
So it's just kind of like everybody's stagnant, waiting for somebody to make the first.
Yeah.
Or maybe Google will come in on a horse and kill everybody.
Yeah, Google's certainly done the most innovation of any of the large high-tech companies in the last couple of years. Anything else? All righty. Thank you.